Hi everyone. As many of you know, my name is Jamie and I am the UB intern here at Crisis Services in the outreach team. As part of my curriculum in the MSW program at UB, we focus a lot on human rights and trauma-informed care. And as part of my trauma and human rights class, I was asked to evaluate this agency to see how trauma-informed we really are here at Crisis Services. The assignment was basically designed to explore and analyze and describe the extent to which the activities of our agency here are consistent with the 5 guiding principles of trauma-informed practice. And many of you already know this, but the 5 principles I'm talking about are safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. I was asked to assess the presence and absence of aspects of trauma-informed care here within our agency. And during the assessment, I found that Crisis Services does a pretty darn good job as a trauma-informed agency. So take a second and give yourself a pat on the back, a little round of applause. So all I'm asking of you now is to just spend the next 20 or so minutes with me and explore this idea of trauma-informed care a little further. And together we can work to dig a little deeper into my idea of another way to further support Crisis Services' reputation of being a trauma-competent agency. And just so you know what to expect during my quick little presentation here, I just put together, just a little thing here just so you're aware. Our first subtopic is going to be what is trauma, why it's important. Our second topic will be trauma and our clients, so the clients that we serve, Crisis Services serves as an agency. 3, the challenges that come along with that. 4, we'll talk about my recommendation and my thought of how we could become further trauma-informed. And then finally, number 5, I'm just going to wrap up quickly. So let's just get started. We all use the word trauma in everyday language. It typically means a highly stressful event, but the key to understanding traumatic events is that it refers to extreme stress that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. There are no clear divisions between stress, trauma, and adaptation. And although I'm writing about psychological trauma and speaking about psychological trauma, it's also important to keep in mind that stress reactions are clearly physiological as well. So different experts in the field define psychological trauma in different ways. And then what I really would like to emphasize, though, and we all know this, it's just kind of a recap, is that it's the individual's subjective experience that determines whether an event is or is not traumatic. So the same scenario can affect me differently than it affects you. You may not be affected and I may find it to be traumatic, or vice versa. It depends on the person. So psychological trauma is the unique individual's experience of an event or enduring conditions in which the individual's ability to integrate his or her emotional experience is overwhelmed, or the individual's experiences a threat to life or bodily integrity or sanity or something like that. Thus, a traumatic event or situations creates the psychological trauma when it overwhelms the person's ability to cope, and it leaves that person, fearing, it could be anything, death, annihilation, mutilation, psychosis. That individual may feel emotionally, cognitively, physically overwhelmed, and the circumstances of that event usually includes, a variety of different things: abuse of power, betrayal of trust, entrapment, helplessness, pain, confusion, and the one that we're very familiar with here at our agency is loss. Our trauma services that we do, we go out and provide trauma response services to somebody who has experienced a loss. So the definition of trauma is fairly broad. It includes responses to powerful one-time incidents like accidents, natural disasters, crimes, surgeries, deaths, and other events. It also includes responses to chronic or repetitive experiences, such as child abuse, neglect, combat, urban violence, concentration camps, battering relationships, enduring deprivation. And this definition intentionally does not allow us to determine whether a particular event is traumatic. That is up to each survivor, basically, of the trauma. The definition really just serves to provide a guideline for our understanding of a survivor's experience of the events and conditions of his or her life. Obviously, we're moving on here to number 2, trauma in our clients. Obviously, you're aware that the population that we serve involves those in mental health. It's the mental health population. The connection between trauma and mental illness is somewhat complex. And that's because not everyone who has experienced trauma and mental illness, not everyone who experiences trauma inevitably develops a mental illness, and not all who are mentally ill have experienced trauma. However, there is a very strong connection that has been established by many, many, many researchers between trauma and mental health. So like I said, it's been widely researched, and it's suspected that those who are genetically predisposed to mental illness are more likely to develop symptoms earlier in their lifetime if they have experienced trauma. It's also been said that experiencing trauma may influence the prevalence and severity of psychiatric symptoms, which I found very interesting. And it's important to remember that trauma is in the eye of the beholder. Common theme that you're going to hear throughout anyone talking about trauma, not just me, is that a situation may not be recognized as traumatic to one person, but it may be recognized as profound traumatization to somebody else. So if you're like me and you're a numbers person, you're going to appreciate some of the numbers I'm going to throw at you here. I hope you guys can see that okay. So 51% of the general population has experienced trauma in childhood. Just want to make sure you guys can see that. Okay. All right. So like I said, 51% of the general population has experienced trauma in childhood. That's barely more than half, but it's still a pretty big number. But then the next one, 98% of people served by behavioral health have experienced trauma. 98%. That is huge. So behavioral health, I mean, that's, most of our clients. With that being said, it's obviously very, very likely that the clients of crisis services have experienced trauma at some point in their lives. Therefore, we as a team and an agency should presume that the clients that we're serving have a history of traumatic stress, and we should exercise universal precautions by creating a holistic system of care that's trauma-informed. And like I said, in my assessment paper that I did, I found that crisis services is highly trauma-informed. I thought that there was a lot of things here that we do really, really well, which is great because, if we don't, we can unintentionally cause harm if we're insensitive to the needs of our clients. Re-traumatizing somebody is a real possibility, and while it's unintentional, it's very possible. And then let me just, I'm sorry. Okay. I'll just throw this, leave that there for a few minutes. Number 3, we're moving on to here, the challenge. So when I'm talking about challenges here, I'm referring to the challenges that we as staff members of this agency may experience when we're working with clients who have experienced trauma, because our clients may not act like a victim. So it's not what you may expect, which is, again, why it's very important for us to just be completely trauma informed in all of our approaches with each and every client. If you're aware of a traumatic experience a client has had, they may not want to or be able to talk about that experience. I know on the permanent client sheet that we have when we open up a case or create a new case, we always try to write these kinds of things down. Just because we see it there on the paper doesn't necessarily mean that it's appropriate for us to bring up. It's just something for us to be aware of and take into consideration when we are assessing them. There's a possibility that they may lie. The clients may give false information or have seemingly inappropriate reactions, especially if this traumatic event that they may have experienced was recent. And then moving on to number 4, my recommendation. So what I've come up with as a recommendation to this agency is a client feedback form, and I'm going to put that up here for you guys. I also included a link so you guys can get an electronic copy of this form. Now this is something that we'll call it a rough draft. It's something that I've been working with corporate to come up with. It's something that I have taken a lot of time with, making sure that we're asking all the right questions and doing all the right things there. Just want to make sure you can see. I know it's kind of hard here, but hopefully you were able to get the handout as well, or if not, there's that electronic copy. We'll just kind of focus in on here. You don't really need to see me. Okay. This client feedback form that I've come up with links in with several of the 5 principles of trauma-informed care that I had previously talked about. It's mostly, though, relating to collaboration. It gives our clients, who is essentially a consumer, to have a choice in evaluating in the agency services. And I'm so sorry. It also allows our clients to not simply be a passive recipient, but to also be an ally to our agency. And I'm going to be honest, initially I was kind of hesitant about recommending to implement this because of the population that we serve. A lot of our clients may not respond appropriately. Many of them are not happy with our presence, and sometimes they react negatively towards us before we even get a chance to work with them. So after talking it over with some of the senior staff here, as well as people in administration, we still feel that it's important to send this out to our clients that we actually make contact with. So this isn't something that we're going to be sending out to our no-sees. This is something that we are going to send out to only the clients that we make contact with. So the clients that we log our visits with and that we write our narrative in the EMR, those are the clients that are getting these. It's important to remember, perhaps that the person that reacted negatively to us being there, it could have been a response to trauma that we didn't even know about. And as far as the clients being mentally with it enough to fill this out, if our services work and our clients are stabilized, which is our ultimate goal, whether or not that requires hospitalization or an outpatient linkage or something along those lines, that's our goal, is for our clients to be stabilized. They should be able to provide appropriate and accurate feedback. As you can see here, I decided to do some scaling questions because it's basically giving a simple like temperature check, if you will, on client sentiment, and all we're looking for, is whether it's to the left, middle, or right of the dial. And this will give us all we need to decide whether action is required. And one of the scholarly articles I was reading about collecting client feedback simply had just said, it's common sense. If a client says it's working, keep doing it. If not, change it. And I also used a space for some open-ended stuff. Here, what were you most satisfied with? What were you least satisfied with? That's kind of open-ended. And then at the bottom, or at the end, I'm sorry, any additional comments. And I left a rather large space there. I've just found in the research that verbatim comments from clients is the most powerful benefit of this whole process. It'll tell us what we've done right. It will tell us what we need to fix. And this forum really is going to educate us on what's important to our clients. I also, in my research, found that it's imperative to send this out to clients as soon as possible after a visit, as response rates fall dramatically the longer you wait. In regards to cultural competency, we are in administration still working as a way to provide this form in different languages. Obviously, people that we work with generally speak English, but there are some that require some sort of Spanish translation or something like that, because we do here in Buffalo work in a very, very diverse community. Excuse me. So, just to kind of go through it a little bit, and I apologize again if you can't see it. I'm really hoping you guys were able to get the handout. We'll just do this for right now. Okay. The first one is talking about, we're just doing how strongly do you agree with these statements. The first one says, I was comfortable speaking with staff. And that's in regards to trust, right? That's one of the 5 principles here. And hopefully they're saying highly agree or agree. The next one, I felt a genuine and caring connection with staff. That's kind of part of the relationship building and that kind of thing. The next one says staff instilled a sense of hope or change. That's part of the empowerment piece. The next one says staff referred me to treatment services in my community. That's just in regards to resources and whatnot. The next one is staff supported the decisions I made in regards to services, which is another empowerment piece. My cultural background was discussed, which is in line with our cultural competency goals. As I mentioned, we're a pretty diverse population, so that's important. And staff treated me with dignity and respect. Also down here at the bottom, it says, did the team inquire? I'm so sorry. Did the team inquire or acknowledge any life events you may have experienced as traumatic? That goes along with the knowledge piece. And then let me switch over to the other part here. So right under my clipboard clip, it says, did the team take time to establish trust and safety with you during your visit? So, it's pretty clear what we're looking for here, what kind of answers we would like to see. And based on the responses, we may find that there are some areas for us to improve our trauma-informed care that we work so hard on every single day as an agency. Again, the way we decided to format this with some open-ended, some close-ended. The open-ended questions allow, obviously, for an infinite number of possible answers. because we're not placing any limits on the responses. And it also gives clients the freedom and space to answer in as much detail as they like, which could clarify and essentially qualify their responses. Which, again, could actually yield in more, not only just more accurate information, but actionable insight for us. It also allows for the possibility that we may discover something completely unique and unexpected, something that we're overlooking, something that we have missed possibly. And, sometimes the unanticipated answers are the most valuable. And it's important, like I had mentioned, that we use a blend, that we do some of these scaling questions. I kind of want to put this one back up here, so you can kind of get a feel for what I mean by the blend. Some of the scaling questions and open-ended, because clients may feel intimidated or disheartened if they're just faced with, a bunch of large blank spaces for their responses. And also open-ended questions hand over all control of the response to the client. And that's good to a point, but then they may only give vague answers, they may misinterpret the questions, they might focus their answer on a side topic that we didn't intend to explore, and responses to open-ended questions may just be flat out inadequate or irrelevant. Or the one sentence that matters could be buried in a long, meandering response. So therefore, it's a good idea to cut our clients some slack, keep the survey short, which is what I tried to do. I tried to get all the important pieces in one short survey, and make the most of our questions, make most of our questions close-ended. Clients may enjoy the freedom to tell us exactly what they think, but we don't want them to feel like this is like an essay assignment and that it's a daunting task of any kind. Now, as far as getting them back, so the plan, as I had mentioned, is to send these out as soon as we possibly can after an outreach visit, after a successful outreach visit. Now, getting them back is another piece of this, because while 100% response rate would be really, really nice, it's just not practical. From the research that I did about this topic, I found that as a rule of thumb, anything above a 10% response rate will yield useful data to kind of drive our change process here. And if we find along the way that we aren't reaching the 10% mark, we may want to start with some reminders. So a simple reminder a few days later, according to the research, a few days after the initial one is sent out, can lift the response to 50 to 90%, which is pretty huge. So, however, we don't want the client to feel harassed. So another option, if we don't want to send out a reminder. So first, to be clear, first we're going to send this out. If we're not getting the response rates that we're looking for, we will consider either sending out the reminders or possibly adding in some sort of incentive. It's kind of tricky because we want to make sure that our surveys stay anonymous, just so clients feel like they can be more truthful with us and not have to worry about backlash or whatever the case may be. But incentives are known to increase the number of responses for the surveys. Research indicates that when used correctly, incentives do not change the reliability of data, because that was something I was a little concerned about. The different options for incentives can include prepaid incentives, something that's given to all people whether they respond or not, which is good because then they're still incentivized, but they're not needing to use their names, but it's something we would need to take into consideration with our budget. Another incentive would be a lottery. If you fill this out, send us your information. We'll enter it in a lottery to win whatever the prize may be, iPad sometimes, or even if we don't go that big, who knows. So, but the problem with that is then they would need to share their identity. So we probably would have to come up with a separate form for them to send back for that. And then another option, which may or may not be beneficial with our population that we work with, is donations. So sometimes they'll say, if you fill this out, we're going to make a donation to such and such an agency in your name. But that may not mean as much to our clients as it will to others. An option would be to create a redirect action at the end of the survey that sends a respondent, the clients, to our second survey that will collect their contact information. And then we can provide them with a prize without needing to associate contact details with their survey. So, it's just something for us to kind of start out slowly with, gauge how we're doing. If we're not meeting that 10% mark, we'll probably have another meeting like this. We'll bring in maybe Tracy from administration, and we'll get everyone on board, and we can kind of figure out what's going to work best for us, because it is very important that we do figure this out together. We want to make sure we're trauma informed. We want to make sure that we're addressing the needs of our clients and making sure that they are getting everything that they need from us. Now finally, just to wrap up, put this back up, even though we're kind of at the end here. We made it all the way through. Our wrap up, it's just important to remember that just because a client doesn't disclose their trauma, if they leave with the impression that you care about what happens to them, it can instill hope, and it can really rehumanize them. And this may lead them to seek help if we weren't able to convince them or help them or assist them, and it may lead to disclosures later on for them. Things to consider: try putting yourself in the client's shoes, normalize and validate their thoughts and feelings, avoid making promises you cannot keep, don't take things personally. I know it's easier said than done. And of course, in social work, we all need to remember this last piece: take care of yourself. Self-care is important. Thank you all for listening and staying tuned to this training video. Let me know if you have any questions or any suggestions. We're going to start sending the forms out in the beginning of the year. So if you feel like there's something that we should tweak in our form, if you feel like there's something we forgot, please, please, please reach out to me. We're going to put the final touches on it and get it started. And I'm here on Friday nights from 4:30 to 11, and on Sundays from 9 to 5:30. So feel free to stop in and ask me any questions then in the outreach office, or give me a call. Thanks so much, guys.